Hey, what's good, everybody? My name is Polo. Hope you're doing well. And today I'm reacting to a video titled 13 Things from the 1970s Kids Will Never Understand. And I didn't grow up in the 70s, but I'm pretty sure a lot of these things from the 70s will probably pass down to my childhood as well, which is in the 80s and the 90s. Let's go ahead and get right into this and see where this takes us.
There are some things that are unique to the decade that we grew up in. The 1970s was no different, having a distinct style that is easily recognizable, even to newer generations. But aside from the obvious disco
Look at those haircuts.
and bell-bottom trends, there were more minute details that people living during that time will easily recognize. So here are 13 things from the 1970s that kids today would never understand. Options for watching TV were very different during the 1970s. For one, there were really only 3 TV channels plus public broadcasting. That's right, just 3. No streaming services, no endless options. You'd also have to get up and manually turn the dial to change channels.
Now, this looks familiar. When I was a kid, some of this stuff didn't just happen in the 1970s, but it's probably where it started, but I was the remote control when I was a kid, and those little knobs on these older TVs, they would break and you'd have to use a pair of pliers to change the channel, and they would tell you to get up to switch the channel. Now, I'm from an era where we had a little bit more than 3 channels, but definitely bringing back some memories.
Was a time in which we waited for our
Brady Bunch
favorite
here.
shows, which included nightly shows that were popular and Saturday morning cartoons. It was a big deal when you could pour a big bowl of cereal and binge hours of your favorite animated shows.
Oh, yeah.
But with the limited options on the television,
He is way too big to have a bottle. All right.
pour a big bowl of cereal and binge hours of your favorite animated shows. But with the limited options on the television, it's no wonder kids spent so much time outside. Well, that and the fact that some parents made their kids go outside and play.
That's right.
During the 70s, making a mixtape was an art form. It took patience and dedication to sit by the radio for hours, waiting for the right song to be played. It didn't matter how good your timing was either, because pushing down the play and record buttons at precisely the right time still sometimes had the DJ talking over the intro. And
Wow. So that started in the 70s, and I didn't know that was a universal thing, because in the 90s I would do this. I would wait by the radio for my favorite song to come on, and I would record it. You have to press both buttons at the same time. And, you just create your own little playlist. And I had a Walkman, I had a bunch of Walkmans, and a bunch of tapes. Oh, wow. So that stems way back from the 70s. Did any of you guys do this? Okay. I didn't know, of course we didn't have cell phones, or, you just think that that's what what you did. I didn't know that was a universal thing.
that was just part of the charm. Cassettes had their quirks too, like when they got tangled and you would have to use a pencil to wind them back in.
I hated that.
Cassettes made it pretty easy to create what we know today as a playlist, and this was the first time we could listen anywhere we wanted.
Now, I never had any headphones as nice as these, but I definitely would get hand-me-down boom boxes, or radios is what we would call this. And in Cleveland, you would see people at the bus stop, with these things. My mother used to carry she always had one of these radios with the cassettes in it, so she loved music.
Did you ever run around the house and pretend you were Superman or Batman? Well, if you did during the 1970s, then you most likely had on a pair of superhero Underoos. For many kids, they served a dual purpose.
Yeah.
They were underwear and part of a costume when you were strutting around the house, feeling invincible. Superhero Underoos were more than just clothing. They were your identity, especially the ones that matched the actual superhero outfits.
So they don't do that anymore. I didn't even realize that's not a thing anymore, because I definitely had, I don't know if I had superhero underwear, but you definitely had something silly on them.
Nowadays, kids can never appreciate their underwear in the same way. Recollection Road is proud to serving visitors to buy music. They were social during Recollection to get started. During the 1970s, record stores were not just places to buy music. They were social gathering spots. Just like the mall of the 1980s, young people would hang out with friends, browse through vinyl records, and even listen to albums before they purchased them.
All right, now this type of place still exists today, at least where I live, and it's one of my favorite places to go. They no longer just do records and music. You know, you can buy posters. I go there for typically DVDs and Blu-rays. I collect them still. I still buy a lot of movies. I have a lot of movies I haven't watched. But when I was young, one of my first jobs, my dream job when I was a teenager was to work at like Blockbuster, movie gallery, and those type of places so that I could rent free movies. I didn't want to work at McDonald's. What perks do you get at McDonald's? A discount on burgers, you know? So when I was young, I wanted to work somewhere, and I did. I worked at movie gallery. I worked at a couple of different movie places, and we were allowed to rent movies unlimited. I thought it was the greatest perk, aside from working at like Foot Locker, where I got a discount on shoes. You know, this when I was younger. But this place still exists today. I love going in there. I love the smell of incense when I walk in. I love the hippie looking people that, you know, I hope it never goes away, but we still have it with all the businesses closing down in my area. This is a place that really brings me joy, and I still visit from time to time and hope they never stop it. And they'll sell old things like old Nintendos and stuff like that. Just retro things, and it's a really beautiful place, and it stems all the way back from the 1970s, which is amazing. So yeah, this is also a really beautiful thing, and one of the things, and it still looks similar to this, just with more added features.
Young people would hang out with friends, browse through vinyl records, and even listen to albums before they purchased them. Store employees at this time were also music enthusiasts, and they would recommend hidden gems. It also wasn't uncommon for you to strike up a conversation with a stranger who was into the same music as you.
That would be nice.
So the local record store was a special place, and yet another experience that is hard to replicate today.
Oh, it's so sad, because kids will not know this. You know, I hear that most kids today, you know, most human today, a lot of interaction today in the young dating world is through social media and DMing and messaging. And this would be more of an organic way to meet someone who has the same music interests as you. Yeah, kids will never know this. And it's kind of scary because it's a beautiful thing versus the sterile way people come together now, the online way.
Hitchhiking during the 1970s was surprisingly easy and acceptable. It was very common to see people thumbing a ride on the side of the road. Drivers would often not hesitate to pick up hitchhikers, and it was seen as a way to help out a fellow traveler. There was more of a sense of camaraderie on the open road back then, and that's hard to understand in today's world.
It's definitely hard to understand for black people. I don't know if we ever got really into the hitchhiking thing. All right? I'm sorry. I've seen too many documentaries.
But it wasn't without risk, and there was still a chance you might encounter a few weirdos. And that was just part of the fun.
I love the way the women dressed back then, though.
Nowadays, it's illegal to hitch free rides in many places. But back then, it wasn't unusual to find a service member, a student, or even a hippie thumbing for a ride. When you think back to the 1970s...
Look at these masculine guys here.
Men had some serious style. They had manly mustaches, sideburns, big hair, and
Ron Burgundy over here.
That distinct aroma of aftershave wafting around them. It was all about the macho look, and men took their grooming pretty seriously.
When I was in high school, don't kill me, but I used to like the smell of Brute. All right, I didn't wear it all the time, but I liked it. My brothers would tease me, you know, like, man, what you got on, Brute? You know, even though I wasn't shaven, but I just like the smell of it.
This was also coupled with some pretty bold choices in clothing too, and as long as you could leave a couple of buttons undone so you could show off your hairy chest, you were good to go.
Here it is.
Nothing quite matches the swagger men had in the 1970s.
Love it.
And speaking of grooming, ladies too had their own unique products to give them that 1970s look.
Where the boys are.
Sun-In was all the rage, promising sun-kissed highlights. Women would spray it into their hair and head outside hoping for those perfect golden locks. And who doesn't remember the smell of Love's Baby Soft, a signature scent from the 1970s? The sweet, youthful fragrance was a defining smell that had all the girls wearing Baby Soft. But I'm not sure the ad campaign would fly today.
Wow, now this I know nothing about. loves Baby Soft because innocence is sexier than you think. Okay. All right.
When the telephone that hung in the kitchen rang, it was always answered. This was before caller ID, so people had no idea who was calling.
That's right.
Can you imagine? You didn't know if it was your best friend or a sales call, which meant there was a chance that you might recognize the voice on the other end and spend some time getting twisted up in the phone cord while you talked. Or
And then your parents pick up the phone and say, "Who on the phone? Get off the phone. I'm expecting the call." I remember when caller ID was an additional feature. You had to pay extra for it. You had to buy a phone that had the caller ID feature. Then they had cordless phones, and but typically before cordless phones, we had this thing, this innovative technology called long ass wire. All right, this is the wire where you can take the phone in any room because it was a long ass wire. It was very, very breakthrough technology.
you might be yelling across the house to let someone else know the call was for them. Today's kids might find it unbelievable that we willingly picked up the phone without the slightest clue as to who was on the other end.
Yep. And you had to remember phone numbers. Now I only remember like maybe 3 phone numbers, which is crazy. But I'm talking about like of friends. I only remember like 3. That's it. But back then you had to remember phone numbers.
To best capture the moments in the 1970s, you absolutely needed a Polaroid camera. The idea of hitting the button and instantly getting a picture developed was gratifying, but you had to be selective because each roll of film only had a certain number of pictures.
Right.
And then there was the practice of shaking the picture to help it develop faster, which was just a myth. But you couldn't take the bulky Polaroid camera with you everywhere. So there were also photo booths that were strategically placed where teenagers congregated.
That was a myth? Everybody did that. I thought that really helped the photo out. Okay, I didn't know that was a myth. All right.
So there were also photo booths that were strategically placed where teenagers congregated. Places like arcades, malls, and roller rinks were ideal, so best friends and couples could capture the day with a series of goofy and fun pictures.
A lot of this is just human interaction. Is what is the theme of this video that I see from the 70s. And when you go to the park, when you go to a lot of different places now, everybody's in their own little bubble, in their own world, in their own digital world on their phones, looking down. And you go out to dinner, everybody's doing that. And in the 70s, you just had more human interaction.
If you were to step back in time and visit a 1970s kitchen, you'd probably find a fair share of mushroom-themed decor. Mushroom plates, mushroom curtains, mushroom wallpaper. They were everywhere. Everything back then seemed to have an earthy aesthetic, and mushrooms must have been the perfect fungus to represent that style.
This is why most of our grandmothers had such, they held on to a lot of this ugly stuff, and they try to give it to you. And if your place is more modern, but I hope this look never comes back, but it added personality. It's it's a staple of that time, so I'm not going to hate on it, but I don't know if it's a trend that will come back. Maybe it is. I don't know.
I guess you'd call it charm, and every corner of the room seemed to be inspired by it. As you waited for the weekend and that special morning of cartoons, you also needed a sugary cereal to help you enjoy it. The 1970s was all about finding the best surprise toy inside the cereal box.
Fruity Pebbles, baby. When I was a kid, Fruity Pebbles was my favorite cereal, okay? Until I wised up and realized that it gets soggy within the first 2 minutes. All right. So you have to eat it really fast. And then I moved on to Captain Crunch. And then, my last favorite cereal, I don't eat cereal at all, was Cinnamon Toast Crunch. But then a lot of different cereals. But if you grew up poor like I did, you mainly couldn't even get the name brand cereals like this. This was a big treat. We used to get the big old bags of Puffs that didn't have sugar or anything, and that you had to add sugar to it. And then we couldn't afford milk, so we had to drink powdered milk. It was disgusting. Sometimes water in your cereal when we didn't have milk, but these are poor people problems, But when you could get Fruity Pebbles, all right, or any name brand cereal as a kid, it was the biggest treat, okay?
Kids would beg their parents for a certain brand of cereal, not because of the taste, but because of the toy. It may have been a silly game or a small figurine, but it was like finding a treasure when you dug down to the bottom of the box and pulled
I didn't start liking, excuse me for pausing. I didn't like Frosted Flakes until I got older. I hated Frosted Flakes as a kid. You know, we had Corn Flakes. I liked Frosted Flakes, okay, but Corn Flakes without the sugar, I hated it.
A treasure when you dug down to the bottom of the box and pulled out the prize. This excitement made morning cereal more than just breakfast, which is much different than today.
He looks happy.
Opening a beer or soda can in the 1970s was a bit different than what we are used to today. You'd pull the ring back and peel back the aluminum tab. And back then, most of the tabs were just tossed on the ground. These sharp pieces of discarded metal were a nuisance, especially on beaches or places where you might walk barefoot.
These were not a nuisance in the hood in Cleveland, at least in the projects that I lived in for a short period. We used these for slingshots, okay? I used to build a slingshot out of a long piece of wood, and on one end I would nail a bunch of, a string of rubber bands to one end, and on the other end I would use a clothes hanger that, you know what I mean, and that would be the trigger. And then we would put these things inside and we would pull the rubber band over the piece of wood and we would basically shoot each other with it. And we would have wars against the other projects. You know, we had different types of slingshots, but we would use these for ammo, but not this specific one. I never seen this can before. That's the 1970s, the more modern cans now. But those tops were we would try to collect those, look everywhere we can, garbage cans, and collect as many as we can. And then we would make slingshots out of them and basically go to war with the rival projects. Kids we used to throw rocks at each other, just really, really bad kids,
These pull tabs were just another hazard that we faced, and the tops would change shortly after to the more familiar stay tab that we recognize today. But it was still...
Yeah, that looks like those cans that they keep that like frozen orange juice in and the cranberry juice. They still use that. It looks more similar to that if you guys know what I'm talking about. But I'm not that old where Coca-Cola looked like that. I didn't know that.
Stay tab that we recognize today, but it was still all part of the fun of living in the 1970s. Last but not least, school lunch in the 1970s wasn't complete without a trusty metal lunchbox and the matching thermos. These lunchboxes not only showed off our favorite characters from pop culture,
Snoopy,
but they often also had their fair share of rust on them too. Any ding or scratch would quickly rust over, and our parents didn't seem to mind either.
I used to love to draw Snoopy in school.
Remember the smell of opening a metal lunchbox after a long, hot day?
Rusted.
Kids today, with their ice packs and insulated lunch bags, will never fully understand what it was like to grow up in the 1970s. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything.
This was, even though it started in the 1970s, a lot of these trends went on into the 80s and even carried into some of the 90s, depending on your probably income level, but definitely a trip down memory lane. And some of the stuff was also new information for me, but the kids wouldn't understand it. Some of these kids, you take their phone away, they absolutely lose their mind, and I don't know. I like to be optimistic, but it's scary.